In our restless dreams, we've been seeing the return of Silent Hill for as long as we can cast our memories back. And after what's felt like an eternity of waiting, the legendary survival horror franchise is finally coming back. And what's more, it's coming back with what's looking like an increasingly promising remake of the series' best installment to date, Silent Hill 2. For many, this will obviously be their first time experiencing the game and its story, in which case, our advice is to obviously for you to turn back and enjoy your first playthrough, knowing as little as you can going in. At the same time, however, many returning and veteran fans will also be coming back to re-experience Silent Hill 2 in enhanced and expanded form. And for that group, a big part of the experience is going to be analyzing the remake's story and storytelling and judging how well Bloober Team's attempts hold up when compared to the seminal original. To that end, with the horror title set to launch not too long from now, here we're going to refresh our memories and go over the full story of Silent Hill 2 from the beginning to the end. Silent Hill 2 begins with protagonist James Sutherland finding himself in the titular town of Silent Hill, Maine, a place that he's very familiar with as a town that he and his wife Mary used to consider their special place after she passed away to a terminal illness 3 years ago. Somehow, however, Mary has managed to find her way back into James's life. Not too long ago, he received a letter from his supposedly dead wife telling him to meet him in their special place. His first instinct was, of course, to assume that the letter was someone's twisted idea of a prank. But from the fact that the handwriting on the letter matched Mary's exactly, to how it mentioned his promise to her that he would bring her back to the town of Silent Hill one day, and how he never did, there were certainly signs that pointed to the impossible possibility that maybe the letter was written and sent by Mary herself. At the very least, it wasn't something James could not investigate. And so he finds himself in Silent Hill, and as the game begins, James too begins his search of Mary. Early on, however, he encounters someone else, an anxious young woman by the name of Angela Orozco, who is looking for her mother in the town, but also seems awfully certain that the town is dangerous and that there's something going on that doesn't meet the eye. Hell-bent on getting to the bottom of the letter from Mary, James disregards Angela's warnings and heads out into the town. Though it's not long before he realizes that things certainly do seem to have gone spectacularly wrong in Silent Hill, which is a far cry from the town that he remembers. On top of being enveloped in a thick, oppressive fog, the town, as it turns out, has not only been left utterly abandoned and in a state of disarray, but is also crawling with horrific monstrosities that almost defy description, like they've been plucked straight out of someone's deepest nightmares. With the utmost of care, James navigates the terrifying town, with his destination being Rosewater Park, a place where he's hoping to find Mary. Getting there requires him to cut through apartment buildings, and as he navigates their cramped interiors, he has several more interesting encounters as things get increasingly unsettling. First, he runs into a little girl named Laura. His first meeting with her is an incredibly brief one, however, to the extent that he doesn't even have the time to learn her name. His next encounter is with Eddie, a young man who is deeply self-conscious about his physical appearance and has been severely bullied his entire life, something that has brought with it its own behavioral problems as well. When James first meets Eddie, he finds him vomiting in a toilet thanks to a corpse found in a nearby refrigerator. Eventually, James parts way with him as well, for the time being at least, before crossing paths once again with Angela. Things begin taking a really dark turn at this point in the game, with James finding Angela standing in front of a mirror with a knife in her hand, seemingly on the verge of taking her own life. He's able to persuade her to hand him the knife, but afterwards, she flees in panic nonetheless, off to search for her mother once again. Meanwhile, as he explores the apartments, James also has a run-in with a nightmarish creature known as Pyramid Head, a humanoid monstrosity with a giant pyramid-shaped object covering its head. The creature, whatever it is clearly far, far from friendly, but James is able to safely make his way around it. James is ultimately able to leave the apartments, following which he runs into Laura yet again, and this time he's actually able to converse with the little girl, though it's not a particularly pleasant conversation with him. Impossibly enough, Laura seems to know Mary, and after angrily accusing James of never having truly loved her, she quickly runs off again. Confusion mounting, James continues on his way to Rosewater Park, and things don't get much clearer once he arrives. Here he meets Maria, a woman who looks like the spitting image of his deceased wife, with the only difference being her much more self-assured personality as compared to Mary. And interestingly enough, she also seems to know things about James and his life with Mary that no one other than the two of them should know. Regardless, with the town being as dangerous as it is, Maria asks to accompany James, who agrees. He, meanwhile, also decides on his next destination now that the park has turned out to be a dead end where his search for his wife is concerned. Now he's headed to Lakeview Hotel where he and Mary once stayed. On the way to the hotel, however, James and Maria cross paths with Eddie once again, and also see Laura once again. However, they only see her briefly because she quickly runs off into the town's fog before long. Worried about her safety, Maria asks James to chase after her, to which he agrees, and not long afterward, their search for Laura leads them to the game's next major location in Brookhaven Hospital, which they see Laura enter before following her inside. Things only go from bad to worse in the hospital, however. James does have another encounter with Laura, and it proves to be another perplexing one, with Laura claiming that she's known Mary for the past year, and James losing his cool over her claims since his wife has, of course, been dead for 3 years at this point. Laura doesn't offer much explanation, however, and then she runs off in search for some mysterious letter that she claims was written by Mary. Not long afterward, James and Maria are ambushed by the monstrosity known as Pyramid Head, and much to James's shock, it ends with it brutally killing Maria just as James is making his escape. Shaken by Maria's death, James decides to focus on finding his wife again and sets off towards the Lakeview Hotel once more. His trek to the hotel, however, is a long one and sees him having to navigate several other locations first. One of them is Toluca Prison, an old abandoned correction facility where, much to his surprise, James finds Maria, who, other than being locked inside of a cell, seems perfectly fine. Stranger still, when James questions her about what happened and how she got there, she says that they were never attacked by Pyramid Head and that she and James simply got separated. On top of that, during their conversation, Maria also seems to be randomly and erratically channeling Mary, almost as if the woman is swapping back and forth between the two different personalities, while also being privy to memories and knowledge that no one other than Mary should know about. James obviously has no clue what the heck is going on. Nevertheless, he tells Maria that he's going to find a way to free her, but when he does eventually manage to make his way into the cell, he finds that she has once again been mysteriously killed. But wait, that's not even it, because things continue to get much darker as James makes his way through the prison. Soon, he once again meets Angela, and the game finally begins to shed some light on her traumatic past, as she tells James about the horrible ways she was traumatized by her father when she was young, something that obviously scarred her for life. At this point, James also fights off and defeats a strange new creature assaulting him and Angela, a creature that, it turns out, is a manifestation of her father and the trauma that she had suffered at his hands. That, of course, cements the notion that the strange creatures roaming the town of Silent Hill are representations of all the traumatic, emotional baggage that the people currently in it have brought with them. Now, back to the situation at hand, though. Angela tells James that she inherently mistrusts him, as she does all men, something born of her aforementioned past experiences, and also expresses doubts over how much James truly loved his wife, just as Laura had at one point. Telling him that he had stopped wanting Mary around after she became sick, she leaves, leaving James alone. He continues on, now making his way through a subterranean labyrinth that the prison was built on top of. Before he's able to exit, he has one more run-in with a familiar face, and it proves to be a dramatic one. James sees Eddie, and by this point, the latter has fully snapped. He tells James that he's finally figured out how to deal with the extreme bullying that he's had to endure his entire life on account of his physical appearance. The solution, according to Eddie, is to kill anyone who bullies him. James tries to reason with Eddie, but unfortunately does so in somewhat of an unkind fashion, asking him if he's, quote, gone nuts, which, as you might imagine, Eddie doesn't really react kindly to. He now perceives James as yet another bully, and the confrontation between the two suddenly grows incredibly violent, ending with James having to kill Eddie. Shocked at having had to kill another human and dismayed at how things ended with Eddie, James stumbles away from the scene. Battered and bruised as he is, though, especially mentally, his destination is finally within reach because as he exits the labyrinth, he's able to find a boat row across the lake, and finally get to the Lakeview Hotel. And here, things finally come to a head. James meets Laura once again, who shows him the letter from Mary that she had mentioned to him earlier. And the letter makes it very clear that the two had indeed known each other for the year, and had even become quite close, to the point where Mary even intended to adopt Laura. To put it mildly, that doesn't align with James's version of things, with Mary having been dead for 3 years. Though, as it turns out, there's not much that can be taken for granted with this story. James makes his way to room 312, where he and Mary stayed on their vacation when they had visited Silent Hill long ago, where he watches a videotape that shows him killing a deathly ill Mary by smothering her with a pillow. As the video ends, James sits in silence as realization of what actually happened comes crashing down on him and his utterly broken psyche. Mary didn't die of sickness 3 years ago. She died much more recently, and she died because James killed her after growing resentful over her terminal illness. He tells Laura what actually happened to Mary, and the little girl instantly leaves, saying nothing other than telling James that she hates him, and clearly meaning it with every fiber of her being. At this point, James receives a radio transmission, seemingly from Mary, who is telling him to find her somewhere in the hotel. James exits the room, and things continue to go from bad to worse. For starters, as he exits the room back out into the hotel, he sees that the building has completely changed and is now little more than a burnt-out husk. One particular corridor is still on fire, and here he finds Angela, who thanks James for saving her, but tells him that the trauma she constantly lives through is too much to take, before walking into the flames and never being seen again, presumably ending her own life. Soon, James once again finds Maria, miraculously alive again, though she is killed before his eyes once more, this time by 2 pyramid heads. It's at this point that James realizes that the pyramid heads are simple manifestations of parts of his own psyche, created so that he can punish himself for what he did to Mary. With that knowledge, he's able to defeat the 2 pyramid heads. James then heads to the hotel's rooftop, and it's here that Silent Hill 2's story comes to a close. There are 6 different endings that players can get based on several factors, and officially the game's developers have always maintained the stance that there is no one canon ending. One ending sees James having one final meeting with Mary in which she forgives him for killing her, after which he leaves Silent Hill in Laura's company. In another ending, James is unable to live with the guilt of having killed his wife, after which he takes his own life by driving into the lake with Mary's body in the car by his side, with the implication being that he had killed her quite recently, perhaps even as recently as the very day that the game's story began. In a third ending, meanwhile, James and Maria end up together, but as the two leave together, we see Maria coughing into her hand, suggesting that she too has the sickness that Mary did, trapping James in an endless cycle. The other 3 endings are decidedly much more out there and probably safe to rule out as canon. In one, James decides that he will use certain artifacts that he's been collecting throughout the game to resurrect Mary. In another, he meets a dog that he discovered had been orchestrating everything that had been happening in the game. The 6th and final ending, meanwhile, sees James being abducted by a UFO that's piloted not only by aliens, but also Harry Mason, the protagonist of the original Silent Hill. So yeah, these probably aren't canon. Either way, that right there is it. The full story of Silent Hill 2 from beginning to the end. How well the upcoming Bloober Team developed remake will be able to do justice to what's undoubtedly one of the greatest and most impactful stories ever told in games remains to be seen, but suffice it to say, expectations are going to be monumentally high. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.